Can listening to plants change how you feel? Or might it even help to reveal new thought patterns or ideas within yourself? That's what I've found over 13 years of listening to plant music. My name is Joe Patitucci. I created PlantWave. I started way back in 2012 when I was making art installations with plants, and then eventually started releasing hardware to allow other artists like me to make plant-based music. And then eventually, obviously, we've released PlantWave, which allows anyone to listen to plants, whether you have skills in designing sounds or not. It's just plug and play. You can listen to it really simply. So we're going to go over some of the mechanisms that are a part of this technology and a part of nature itself that help to relax us and find new ideas, new inspiration. This is actually like a scientifically known thing. And so we're going to get into that. So first, the idea of hooking up to plants to synthesizers, sounds like a crazy thing, like music as an expression of biology. However, if you think about it, all music is an expression of biology. All human-composed music is uniquely an expression of humanity. There's a musicologist named Michael Spitzer, and he talks about dance music as being a unique expression of bipedalism. So 4 on the floor, any kind of dance music where it's, a thumping bass, that is really an expression of us having 2 feet, because that is what it's replicating. It's replicating or kind of evoking the feeling of walking or stepping, right? And so dance music is an expression of these internal aspects of being a human. And that helps to synchronize us in dance. It also helps to synchronize us in community. With plant music, we're listening to the expression of biology outside of ourselves. It's the biology of plants. And so with that, it brings to mind the question of how does that help humans synchronize with nature, and what might that do for our relationship with nature and ourselves? And then what are some of the mechanisms behind the phenomena of us connecting with plants in this way? It's actually really fascinating. But first, it's really important that we understand where plant music comes from. How did this start? And so when I started making plant music back in 2012, one of the biggest inspirations for me was the artist Brian Eno. And Brian Eno is an amazing musician and producer, and he is known as the godfather of generative music. And so what is generative music? Well, generative music is music that's non-linear and it's process-based. So what that means is it's not like telling a specific story. It's not something where the artist sits down and writes something out like this is going to happen in verse, chorus, verse, where every note is predetermined. Generative music is where the artist kind of creates a process for chance to happen, for these patterns to be able to emerge as music. When Brian Eno started doing this, he made this album called Music for Airports, and that's one of his first ambient records. And in Music for Airports, what Brian Eno did is he actually recorded some piano loops on different lengths of tape. And so he had these tapes like wrapped all around chair legs, and they were huge loops of tapes and smaller loops of tapes. But then each phrase had a different length each tape had a different length, and each time they looped, they had a different relationship between the different tapes. So the instruments kind of never played the same phrases the same way in repeat. They always had this evolving relationship. Over time, Brian Eno started to use more computers in his work, and then he started to even play around with using things like spreadsheets to select different audio clips. And one of the things that really inspired Brian Eno was this computational model called cellular automata. Cellular automata is actually just this concept that simple rule sets played out over time can result in complex forms. So it was actually a computational model that was built to emulate nature using digital technology. The way it could work is something very simple. If you just think of it as like a pixel, and you have a pixel here, and then you just tell a computer, okay, random number generator, you're either gonna make your next pixel up, down, right or left. And then the computer makes a new pixel there, and then it keeps going. Over time, you're going to end up with this like geometric shape that could be interesting. And that's how fractals and things like that could emerge, and these really beautiful, complex forms, just from simple rule sets and time. Moving on, plant music in a lot of ways is this building on Brian Eno's work of inspiration from cellular automata. And the way I got there was a little different from Brian Eno. I used to go out into the forest and make field recordings and listen to nature. And I would go back into the studio and I'd close my eyes and I would listen to the nature and I would write music. And over time, it started to feel like I was kind of channeling the energy of these spaces. And I was really interested in exploring this idea that maybe it's actually the energy of these spaces, the energy of nature that's moving through me, this creative force of the universe that's moving through me as music. And I thought, well, what would that be like if I connected directly to the source of my inspiration, a plant, and built some technology and built a system to allow that to express itself as music. And in that moment, I realized, okay, it's basically the same thing as what Brian Eno is doing, where he's using this theoretical framework that emulates nature. And instead of that, we're using nature itself instead of this like computational framework. So it's really cool to replace the algorithm with a plant and replace the algorithm that's simulating nature with nature itself. So to give you some context of how this all works, PlantWave is measuring these slight changes in conductivity through a plant, slight changes in impedance. What that means is we're sending a small electrical signal through the plant, and we're measuring how much of that signal gets from one part of the plant to the other. And that varies over time because as a plant is photosynthesizing, it's moving water around. So there'll be more or less water between those 2 points over time. And so the conductivity rises and falls. And then over time, you can see that makes a wave. So what we do is we translate that wave into pitch, and then we route those pitch messages to different instruments that I design. And so the result is this pleasing, continuous stream of music. So I have a PlantWave right behind me, and I have my PlantWave app right here. So I'm going to connect that plant to the app so we can listen to some of this music, so we just know what we're referencing here. So I'm just going to connect here. And so we have different instruments here. There's piano, and there is, let's see what we have. Bass, piano, we have vocals, and we have a synthesizer. One of these basses is bass, and the other is kind of like a monophonic synthesizer that's pitched up. And so you might notice when you hear this music that maybe you feel a little bit more relaxed or connected or inspired to realize that plant right there is making all of that music. There are actually mechanisms behind what is relaxing you in this moment. And some of those are by design. And some of those are also just natural and part of biology. One of the aspects that is by design is that it's non-lyrical, right? So there's no vocals that are saying words that are kind of telling you what to think in any way, right? It's just pure stream of music. There's no story behind it. There's nothing to remind you about whatever else is going on in your day or anything like that. It's just non-lyrical and it's just happening. The other thing by design is that the scales that we use at PlantWave are pentatonic. And pentatonic scales are very common in Asia and Africa. And one of the characteristics of these kinds of scales is that they're a little bit more harmonious than other scales. They don't have any notes that are adjacent to each other, so they don't have any notes that could create dissonance, especially when there are effects and spacious reverbs and echo in there. So there's something that's a little bit extra harmonious about pentatonic scales, and it also shows up in humans when a human is asked to sing a scale in a group. What happens is that humans normally default to a pentatonic scale. So I'll have a link to a cool video about that Bobby McFerrin actually did. That's one aspect. Those design aspects are huge in why you're feeling how you're feeling when you listen to plant music. Beyond that, there are aspects that are inherent to nature that also will relax you, that plant music helps to amplify. First, obviously, just being in the presence of plants helps to relax us as human beings. So it helps to just take our focus off of ourselves and helps us to see ourselves as part of a greater cosmic cosmic story or cosmic vision, right? So that's why in Japan, they actually will prescribe what they call forest bathing or shinrin-yoku. They'll prescribe people to go and walk in nature for things like anxiety and depression as part of a greater routine. But one of the things that they have people do is go into the forest, go experience nature, because it changes how we feel. The next thing is this idea of stochastic resonance. Now, stochastic resonance, that might sound like a very technical term, but really what it is it's just this phenomenon where randomness, when it's harmonious, can be really soothing. So you can think of this as if you're staring at light filtering through a tree while the wind is blowing, and you see these patterns happening, and they're random, but they're really soothing. The same thing as maybe looking at the ocean and looking at the wind creating ripples on the ocean. It's random, it's kind of noisy, but it also is soothing. And one of the reasons is this idea of stochastic resonance, where there's a perfect amount of noise that's harmonious that allows our brains to relax, and it allows new unseen or unexamined patterns within ourselves to emerge. And so that's why if you're like laying on the beach, just staring at ripples in the ocean, maybe you have an inspired thought, because the ripples on the ocean, there are so many of them that you can't predict what's going to happen next. It like obliterates your ability to predict what has to happen next or what's going to happen next. So in that kind of situation, when it's harmonious, our biology just says surrender, experience, listen, feel. And in that state, these subtle signals in our brain get to get turned up. So we get to have great ideas. We get to just feel a deeper sense of love and connection. So those are the mechanisms for how plant music, how PlantWave helps to kind of relax us and find new things within ourselves. And beyond that, one thing that's really cool about PlantWave music is that it's responsive, right? It's always shifting because the plant is shifting. So you're hearing the plant respond to the things that it needs to respond to as a plant, and you're hearing how that affects the music. So plants are obviously, they're like antennae for light. They're basically like eating light that we can't see. The amount of light in the universe is huge. The visible light spectrum is like this. But plants are responding to all sorts of light outside of what we can actually perceive. So by listening to plants, we're almost getting this window into another dimension. We're getting this information that our consciousness filters out, just our biology filters out. It's maybe not important information for humans to respond to, but plants, it's important information because it's energy. So that's another thing that's really cool about plant music. So then when you add that, you stack that on top of already this relaxing aspect to it, it can kind of open us up even more to dimensions outside of ourselves, and to really be a little bit more sensitive, to allow ourselves to receive these shifts that are happening in the music with plants. So my personal journey with plant music and how it's changed my life is that I started showing it in 2012 at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And I had this installation there where I had 4 different plants, each playing different instruments, and they were each placed in different parts of a room. You know, thousands of people came through this installation, but every once in a while somebody would walk in and the music would completely change. The plant that was closest to them would shift in what it was doing, and then the other plants in the room would also start to shift. So when I first experienced this, I thought, whoa, this is like wild, like what's happening here? And every time I would bring this up to the person that seemed to have an effect on the music, they would just tell me, oh yeah, that makes total sense. I was like, what do you mean that makes total sense? And they'd say, oh yeah, you know, I'm an energy healer, or I'm a botanist, or I'm a florist, or I'm a Reiki master. So these were people that were deeply in tune with either plants or skills around channeling subtle forms of energy. And so for these people, they took it as just matter of fact that these plants would sense these people, and they would have this relationship with the plants that obviously that would affect the plant's energy. So I thought that was really interesting, and it opened me up to new ways of seeing the world and energy, and it opened me up to different sorts of modalities that help me to understand energy more and have a deeper connection to energy and cultivate that within myself. And so one of those practices is a practice of breath work. So I started to design sounds for plants to play, instruments for plants to play that would hold space for my breathwork practice. And that's actually the sounds you're hearing right now. And what I would do is when I would hear a big shift in the music, I would use that as a prompt to tune into what was shifting within myself. How was I feeling in that moment? What was coming up for me? Was there a thought or feeling that was coming up for me in that moment that I heard that shift in the music? And I would allow that to be a bit of a guide for me and to help to reveal these patterns within myself. I didn't even know the mechanisms yet, but that's what was happening, was that the plants were helping me to see these deeper patterns within myself through the harmony, through the stochastic resonance, through the presence with plants. And then I came across this quote from Terence McKenna, and this is going to sound like super esoteric, it's super out there. But Terence McKenna was an ethnobotanist. He is pretty deep into psychedelics and learning about indigenous medicine and things like that. And one of the things that he talks about with these different plants is he actually says that biological systems are amplifiers of quantum mechanical indeterminacy. So they're a way of taking the smidgen of indeterminacy that exists on the microphysical level and coaxing it into a kind of macrophysical cascade, which is life, consciousness, and self-reflection. So it sounds like pretty out there, but what he's basically saying is that biological systems like plants, they're a way of turning infinite potential into form. It's like the quantum realm of infinite possibilities of like ether, taking that and going from there into form, whether that means quantum potential of ideas into form or quantum potential of whatever into life. It's basically biological systems are taking all of the possibilities in the universe and they're creating life from it. So I just think that's really beautiful. And I like how by listening with PlantWave, we're kind of accessing this moment, right, where anything can happen, and then every next note is a new form. Every next note is an expression of this like quantum realm of infinite possibilities coalescing into a note, a moment. And so I love that, and that helps to really like bring me into like a more grounded presence with life in a way that pre-recorded music absolutely can't do, because pre-recorded music was somebody else's moment somewhere in a studio somewhere, and this is my moment, this is your moment, this is the plant's moment. So that's something I really, really, really appreciate. So, can listening to plants actually change how you feel or even reveal patterns within yourself? Yes. That's what we've discovered with PlantWave. That's what we've experienced as humans. And there are real mechanisms behind it. So now you know, through pentatonic scales, non-lyrical music, presence with plants, stochastic resonance, and the fact that the plants are responding in real time as they're holding this space, it creates this perfect place for us to inhabit, to have new ideas and to have things come forth. There's no other way that plant music would have come through me as a human being and be delivered as a product, PlantWave, if I didn't have these experiences with plants. The plants held the space for me to bring this thing to you. So sounds kind of wild, but that's been my life. So thanks so much for watching. If plant music is for you, if you want to try this out, please purchase a PlantWave and support this work. Also, we do have recordings that are on our YouTube, so please feel free to just watch those and receive the stochastic resonance with your nervous system and your ears. And so thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to y'all soon. Peace.